How would you like a 15% discount to my daily email, the stack of stuff, the show notes, discounts to the conference, all of that? All you need to do is text the word show to 33777. You'll get the annual subscription with a 15% discount to my daily email. You'll get the stack of stuff, the links to the show notes, discounts to the conference, and so much more. All you have to do is text the word show, SHOW, to 33777. Text show to 33777.
Welcome to the Eric Erickson Show podcast, Hour 3.
My fellow Americans, I'm delighted to have you with me today. Welcome. The phone number is 877-973-7425. If you would like to be on the program, very happy to have you. Real quick, if you got Christmas song recommendations for the Christmas show, I'm putting the final touches on what music to be played. You can email me, eric@ewerickson.com. I will take those under advisement. No guarantees. I'll play them as we're building them up. Got some good interviews scheduled for the annual Christmas show. This is going to be, if you were listening yesterday, a little bit repetitious at first because some of the audio I'm going to play, but it's for a completely different reason. The audio from yesterday just has to be very, very relevant to the point that needs to be made related to some stuff in the news today. And I want to go to Donald Trump's Meet the Press interview. I want to go back to it. And let me go here now. This is Donald Trump talking to Kristen Welker of Meet the Press about the Dreamers.
The Dreamers are going to come later, and we have to do something about the Dreamers because these are people that have been brought here at a very young age, and many of these are middle-aged people now. They don't even speak the language of their country, and yes, we're going to do something about the Dreamers.
What does that mean? What are you going to do?
I will work with the Democrats on a plan, and if we can come up with a plan, but the Democrats have made it very, very difficult to do anything. Republicans are very open to the Dreamers. The Dreamers, we're talking many years ago, they were brought into this country. Many years ago. Some of them are no longer young people, and in many cases, they become successful. They have great jobs. In some cases, they have small businesses. Some cases, they might have large businesses. And we're going to have to do something with them. And
you want them to be able to stay. That's what you're saying.
I do.
Okay.
I want to be able to work something out. And it should have been able to be worked out over the last 3 or 4 years. And it never got worked out. You know, Biden could have done it because he controlled, Congress to a certain extent, right? He could have done something, but they didn't do it. I never understood why, because they always seem to want to do it. But then when it comes down to it, they don't. I think we can work with the Democrats and work something out.
That's Donald Trump on the Dreamers. And who specifically is he talking about? There are in this country 20 and 30-something-year-old adults who came here as small children with their parents illegally decades ago. And they've been in this country in legal limbo ever since. They don't know any other country. They have no memory of another country. Many of them speak English better than Spanish, and some want them deported. I personally, I'll tell you my own position. I'll lay it out there. I think it would be cruel to deport a 20 or 30-something-year-old person who has only ever known this country, has no memory of their home country, and the only reason they're being deported is because their parents committed a crime decades ago and brought them into this country. I know there are people who say otherwise. I personally also view the situation as if we built a wall and secure the border, many people who dogmatically insist even these people should be deported would probably say, no, okay, we can leave you here. My personal view on immigration at this point, there are very few things on which I've changed my mind politically over the last few decades. And this is where I've changed my mind on this one. I think anyone who's come here in the last 4 years under Joe Biden, I don't care the circumstances, I don't care the story, deport them. But the grandmother who illegally crossed the border 30, 40 years ago, we tell her you can stay, but you're never getting citizenship. And in fact, we tell the Dreamers you can't get citizenship. You can become a legal resident alien, never fear for deportation again, but you can't be a citizen. We should deprive all of these people of citizenship, but some of them, I think, you've been here so long, You've established roots. Some of you have no memory of another country. We'll let you stay, but you're never going to be able to vote in an election. You're never going to be a citizen. I think we can do that. It's compassionate, but it also has a penalty to discourage other people from doing it. You can disagree on that. That's fine. But Donald Trump sounds like he's on board with me at this point. It's a reasonable position to have. And it's not only reasonable on that, he also was asked about Jerome Powell and tossing Jerome Powell. There have been pressure from MAGA to fire Jerome Powell. This is Donald Trump.
The chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, said he will not leave his post even if you ask him to. Will you try to replace Jerome Powell?
No, I don't think so. I don't see it. But I don't know. I think if I told him to, he would. But if I asked him to, he probably wouldn't. But if I told him to, he would.
You don't have plans to do that right now?
No, I don't.
Not going to fire Jerome Powell. In other words, Donald Trump is being very reasonable. He's being very reasonable. Now, this is Michael Schmidt in the New York Times today, and this is why I bring all of this up. Headline, a test for the system. Donald Trump will take office with weekend checks on his power. When the makers of Schoolhouse Rock set out in the 1970s to explain how the federal government works, they likened it to a three-ring circus. It was more than just a comment on the chaos of Washington. It was a metaphor for the three co-equal branches of government that make our democracy what it is. Each controls the other, you see, the song went, and that's what we call checks and balances. I'm an investigative reporter for the New York Times, and I've been thinking a lot about those three branches. The basic building blocks of government will fare with President-elect Donald Trump returning to power. He has promised to upend the system and use its power to prosecute his political enemies, and Democrats and anti-Trump Republicans warn that means he will use his second presidency to rule like an autocrat, putting extraordinary pressure on the nation's democratic experiment. Some people I've spoken to about this, including top officials from Trump's first administration, have faith in the three branches of government, a system built to keep presidents' power in check. But the country's three branches of government are in a weaker position to hold a president accountable than they were when Trump first took office in 2017, in part because of the stranglehold he has over his own party and some of the change he has promised to bring Washington would further erode checks and balances. I want to note a couple of things here as he descends into this. One of which is he gives very little coverage in this piece to the federal courts. The United States Supreme Court has, even with the Trump appointees, not always sided with Donald Trump. But you see, this guy writing for the New York Times has got to be a progressive, and progressives have been working very hard to undermine people's faith in the Supreme Court, and so this guy has no faith in the Supreme Court. In fact, let's see. Here's what he writes on the court. One of the greatest tests of three branches came when President Richard Nixon was accused of abusing his power and breaking the law. He was investigated by the Justice Department, FBI, and the executive branch. He was compelled to disclose evidence in a landmark decision by the Supreme Court, which is part of the judicial branch. When he took office in 2017, the ideological divide was evenly split on the Supreme Court, except it really wasn't. Over the course of his term, he appointed three justices and stacked the lower courts with hardened conservatives. Earlier this year, in connection with the Justice Department's indictment against him, the court ruled that a president has significant immunity. Trump embraced the decision. That's kind of a rather broad reading of what the Supreme Court decided, and many of the people who say that literally claimed at one point the Supreme Court gave him the power to assassinate his political opponents, which wasn't true. So you've got a guy at the New York Times, when Trump is now doing everything he can to be reasonable, coming out and saying, actually, the system may not be strong enough to stop Donald Trump. And he begins, by the way, with one of the things that I think it's a personal pet peeve, claiming that there are three co-equal branches of government. There are not three co-equal branches of government. Remember what I talked the other day about norms, and Democrats talk about shattered norms, and it only applies to Republicans, never applies to them. It is a Democratic norm to claim there are three co-equal branches of government. There are not. The order in which the branches were written in the Constitution, Articles 1, 2, and 3, they are the strongest to the weakest branch of government. The Congress is stronger than the presidency and the judiciary. That doesn't mean they don't have checks and balances on each other. They do. But the Congress reigns supreme. The Congress can impeach Supreme Court justices and deny funding for the Supreme Court. In fact, Congress has so much power over the courts, they get to form all the lower courts. They get to approve all the judges, the Senate does, and they get to fund them or not fund them, and they have so much power over that. The Constitution admonishes Congress, you can't actually dock the pay of sitting judges. You can cut off their power, you can stop paying the power bill, you can stop paying the law clerks, you can stop paying everything, but you can't stop paying the judges. That's how much power Congress has. The Supreme Court has relatively little power over Congress, other than interpreting laws and deciding whether they're constitutional or not. It is actually a lie. And by the way, it's the way we all grew up. I acknowledge that there were three co-equal branches of government, but that's not in the writings of the Federalist Papers. That's not in the thinking of the founders. There are three branches of government. They have checks and balances on each other, but Congress reigns supreme. And Congress can take power back from the president at any time, and I wish it would. What I find very notable from Michael Schmidt in the New York Times, though, is this fear that the courts aren't going to restrain Donald Trump. The courts actually have a lot of power against the executive, more than against Congress. You almost have two co-equal branches, the executive and the judiciary, but Congress lords over both of them. But you're not going to get that from the New York Times. Instead, you're going to get fear, and what you're going to get is a very, very up to the line, almost explicit statement that this guy, Michael Schmidt, and the New York Times doesn't have faith in our Constitution. I have extraordinary faith in our Constitution. And by the way, I get this all the time from reporters. I have a reporter who texts me all the time who's convinced that Donald Trump's going to wreck the system. I'm like, no, the system's stronger than Donald Trump. The constitutional system that we have is stronger than any one man. Well, no. You don't understand. You don't understand. The Republicans are never. Matt Gaetz. Hello, Matt Gaetz. Why is Matt Gaetz not the Attorney General of the United States or the incoming Attorney General of the United States? Because our system of government is stronger than Donald Trump, and enough senators rejected him, he had to pull his name. It's why Pete Hegseth's nomination is in jeopardy, because the system is stronger than the President of the United States. And the only people who do not think that's so are the people who have been committed to weakening that system over the last number of years so they can have an autocrat in the form of a Democrat. You know, that's something people miss. All these people who think Donald Trump is an autocrat, they're perfectly happy with autocrats so long as he has a D next to his name. These people are perfectly happy to have a Democrat in charge. I just think, my friends, that the worries and the hand-wringing from members of the media over our system would never come up if a Democrat was similarly situated. They only care about it for Donald Trump. And because they think that our system is systemically racist and bad, they can't understand just how great our system is. You know, there's some polling out from Patrick Ruffini of Echelon Insights. Turns out that white progressives are more likely than black or Hispanic Americans to think our country's racist, and more likely than black or Hispanic Americans to say they don't have pride in our country. And those are the people who write at the New York Times. By the way, before I get out here, there's some breaking news. Mitch McConnell, 82 years old, has fallen during a Republican lunch on Capitol Hill. EMTs are treating him. He injured his face. This is the second big fall for Mitch McConnell. He had that one that gave him a concussion. Appears he will be fine, but he has fallen. That's breaking news hitting the wire here as we go to commercial break. Hey, Mom, I'm going to be on News Nation at 3:15 p.m. Eastern, 2:15 your time. I'm not sure what channel it is, though, on your cable package, but I'll be on News Nation at 3:15 p.m. That's mostly for my mom and dad, but for the rest of you as well. I'll be on TV here in a little while. Eli Lake writing in the Free Press. According to President Joe Biden, the end of Bashar al-Assad's tyranny in Syria was made possible by his administration's foreign policy. Speaking from the White House Sunday in a televised address, he said, quote, "For years, the main backers of Assad have been Iran, Hezbollah, and Russia. But over the last week, their support collapsed, all three of them, because all three of them are far weaker today than they were when I took office. Try not to laugh." Biden attributes the woes that have befallen this axis of resistance to the blows Ukraine and Israel have delivered upon their own self-defense with unflagging support from the U.S. This isn't just a deceptive telling of recent history. Biden had it backwards. While it's true Iran, Hezbollah, and Russia are weaker today than they were when Biden was inaugurated, it's not because Biden had the foresight to unleash the Jewish state against America's enemies. It's because Israel defied Biden's efforts to restrain it. Syria has toppled its tyrant in spite of Biden, not because of it. When Israel took the very steps that have weakened Iran and its proxies, it was greeted by threats and disapproval from Washington. On September 24th, the UN General Assembly, Biden pleaded for Israel to accept a diplomatic solution. In May, Biden threatened to withhold vital arms shipments to Israel. Biden's approach to Israel's war has been to prevent regional escalation. That may sound sensible, but it's meant limiting Israel's ability to be defensive against Iran's proxies. This conventional wisdom boiled down to respecting Iran's regional ambitions. Instead of trying to roll back the militias funded, trained, and directed by the Islamic Republic's Revolutionary Guard, Obama tried to manage the conflict. Like Biden, he wanted to avoid escalation. Biden told Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic in 2016, quote, "The competition between the Saudis and the Iranians, which has helped to feed proxy wars and chaos, requires us to say to our friends as well as to the Iranians that they need to find an effective way to share the neighborhood and institute some sort of cold peace. To be sure, the Obama doctrine did not formally accept Iran's cynical meddling in Syria, Yemen, Iraq, and Lebanon, but Obama was unwilling to do anything about Iran's imperialism. After Assad violated his 2013 red line, Obama punted. He asked Congress for a formal authorization to use force. In the end, the U.S. did nothing. In less than 2 years, Russia's Air Force was in Syria bombing the rebels America said it was supporting. Obama and Biden have both botched the Middle East, and now Biden has the audacity to try to claim credit for things that we worked very hard to prevent happening. Iran being dispatched by Israel and Syria falling to the rebels. But of course, Joe Biden wants the credit. Now, I want to give credit to Old Glory Bank for rethinking how to do business as a bank. A group of conservatives got together. They said they wanted a bank where a conservative business or individual could do business and know their bank account's never going to get canceled because they're conservatives. It gave rise to Old Glory Bank. There were several competing ventures out there. This is the one that worked. Why? Because instead of thinking outside the box, they thought inside the box. They bought an existing bank. They rebranded it. They made it available nationwide instead of regionally in Oklahoma where it's headquartered. And they started taking not only online deposits, but figuring out how they'd be able to accept cash at the bank by people remotely. And it's worked. There are 88,000 retail locations where you can deposit cash using a QR code on an app, and it goes into your bank account. I've used it. It works. Old Glory Bank works. They work for you. They do loans for businesses and homes, mortgages, automobiles, you name it. All you have to do is go to oldglorybank.com. Oldglorybank.com. You can fill everything out online at oldglorybank.com. Member FDIC, equal housing lender, terms and conditions apply. And yes, it really is my bank. It can be your bank too. Welcome. It is Eric Erickson here. The phone number is 877-973-7425. Should you wish to be on the program, there are a couple things I want to weave together, and I may fail, but I'm going to try. This past week, world leaders gathered in Paris for the reopening of Notre Dame. I think probably all of us remember when Notre Dame caught fire. It was a global news story because it's such an iconic building. It happened in 2019. Mary, Queen of Scots, was married at Notre Dame. Joan of Arc was beatified at Notre Dame. Napoleon was crowned in Notre Dame. There are books written about Notre Dame, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. There are movies that feature Notre Dame. The bells of Notre Dame are famous. In the French Revolution, the revolutionaries stormed in and stole many of the bells and melted them down to make cannons and weapons. Notre Dame has been central to Paris, but it's been central to Western civilization. It is the epitome of a Gothic cathedral. It is something that was remarkable, and there was a massive controversy after the fire in how they were going to rebuild it, as to whether or not they were going to rebuild it the same or whether or not they were going to modernize it in ways that would bring about modern architecture, which I personally think lacks soul. And they chose to build it as it was, a beautiful restoration. Now, this is not the first time that Notre Dame has been restored. And you know that the spire didn't exist until the 18th century, or 19th century, rather. Eugene Emmanuel Volley-de-Doc rebuilt, renovated, changed one of the windows, altered one of the rosettes by 15 degrees, changed out the structure of some of the windows, added more statues of the apostles, brought back statues from the Old Testament that had been torn down in the French Revolution. Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, rebuilt it as the world knew it. We don't build buildings like Notre Dame anymore. And I see a lot of people online lament, we don't build buildings like this anymore. We don't. Why don't we? One, because our money goes to where our heart is, and our hearts are now selfish. They're not geared toward God. We don't build elaborate cathedrals to God anymore because we want our money to go to skyscrapers, to capitalism, to banks, to things like that. We put our money where our minds and hearts are. Where our money goes shows what we worship, and Western society worships money. That's why in every town, the biggest building tends to be owned by the bank, not the church. We don't build great buildings anymore, by and large. And then the more modern you are, the more I think architecture loses its old. My son is into modern architecture, and some of it I do appreciate. Some of it I do find pretty. I like modern architecture that reflects the past, but the Cubist 1950s, 60s architecture, like go find a Catholic church, the post-Vatican II Catholic churches, and they all look despicable. You can tell them. I mean, you can drive past one of these Catholic churches built in the 60s and 70s. You're like, that's a church? Meanwhile, here I am in Macon, Georgia, and out my window is St. Joseph's Cathedral, built by slaves in the 1800s. It is a gorgeous, gorgeous old building. We don't build buildings like that anymore. We've detached ourselves from God. We've detached ourselves from that level of architecture. There's an architecture firm in Atlanta called Historical Properties. And one day, if I can get my buddy Vince Longo to build my house, if I can find the money, grow the show, get more revenue, buy some land, I want to build the house. And I want my house to look like it's been sitting on the land for 200 years. I want something that's very modern, but looks like it's been there for 200 years. I want something that has all the modern luxuries. I want one of those car wash showers with the bajillion shower heads in it that spray every crack in your body at the same time under immense water pressure, enough to take your skin off, and have a steam room that built into the shower. I want a car wash shower. But I want the house to look like it's been there forever. I want something that just looks like it was purpose-built centuries ago. Too much of our modernity is modern for the sake of modern, and that gets into social media and how social media detracts us and detaches us from things that are beautiful. I follow accounts on social media that show beautiful things, beautiful architecture, beautiful landscapes. And I find the more and more people are online, the more detached they become from reality, and honestly, the more they become detached from beauty. You know, one of the most beautiful things on planet Earth, we don't talk about it in this way. Do you know one of the most beautiful things on planet Earth? People. Now, I say people are stupid all the time. But people are made in the image of God. And that's beautiful. And every individual on planet Earth is distinct and unique, except for identical twins. Even identical twins have different fingerprints. Every single person on the planet is unique. And when we weave ourselves into social media and become hyper online and hyper isolated, we forget the beauty of all other people. We can forget beauty in the world. Luigi Mangione appears to have been one of the people who went so down online rabbit holes, he forgot the beauty of the world around him, and all he was left with was what you find on social media, which is anger. Now, I want you to follow along with me on a couple of points here. Just follow along with me. There is a common theme, and it's a theme reflected in, for example, C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. It's in J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit series, in a lot of T.S. Eliot's writings and in Christian philosophy, that God creates, and in fact, if you're Jewish, you'll appreciate this, I think, more than most Christians. In Genesis 1, when it talks about the creation story, it uses the word bara. God baras. God creates. And that word bara, it's a divine word. It never applies in Scripture to us. And it means God divinely created something, in some way created something that we can't create. So when they built the Tower of Babel, you didn't see the word bara. When Noah built the ark, you didn't see bara. But when God made the first day, it's bara. When God made people, bara. God created, bara. He created divinely. And that divinity in that creation was something special, and it was something unique. And we tend to devalue now that creation. The more you go online, you see devaluing of it. And this gets to the point of T.S. Eliot and C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, that what we do when we attempt to do something divine is all we can do is mock. And the further away from God you get, the more you mock. So, for example, Sauron and Saruman and the building of the Uruk-hai and the like in Lord of the Rings, they can't build creatures created fearfully in the image of God. They can build things that mock God's creation. They can't build real community. They build something that mocks real community. And in the same way, God intended us to be with other people. I mean, Adam and Eve were created as a couple because God said man's not meant to be alone. And so when we build community online, we build community that mocks God's community. We build a community that perversely isolates us. It doesn't unite us. We think we're united. We think we're plugged in, but we're overwhelmed and we're isolated. We're sitting in front of our computer. We're not with other people. We're not breaking bread. We're yelling angrily at people we don't even know online, many of whom are bots. And as we get pulled into that, we separate more and more from what God intended. We build a community of our own, and it's a cesspool because we cannot build divinely in the way God does. Anything we do sinfully mocks him. And we see this online in the perversions of social media, where many people, and I've run this risk myself, where you interact with someone regularly on Instagram. What do you call them? My friend, my friend, my friend. You don't know them. You've never met them in person. You just interact with them on social media. You see their stuff on Instagram, and suddenly you think you're friends with them. You become invested in the life of a stranger. And that stranger's not going to be there to tend to you if you get sick. That stranger's not going to be there. We've built a community that mocks. Louis Mangione was just pulled into a jail about 20 minutes ago. And he started yelling at the cameras. He started yelling to the press. And what did he start saying? What was he yelling at the end? He was yelling about this mocks and betrays Americans. It's completely out of touch and an insult to the intelligence of the American people and their lived experience. Their lived experience, he said. That is the language of someone who has been hyper online. When have you ever heard someone in the wild outside of a nutty progressive talk about everybody's lived experience? You hear the left say it. I've mocked the left on this point, that they tell us always about understanding people's lived experience. And when Americans tell them that the economy sucks in their lived experience, the left mocks them for that. But the lived experience phrase, it's something that people hyper online say. Louis Mangione, based on what we know, had back surgery, went through a period of despair dealing with insurance companies alike, and he got super online and he went down rabbit holes and he isolated himself. And in isolating himself, he got hyper online. Dude needed to touch some grass. And there's a lesson for all of us in this. How so many of us, we need to touch grass. We need to get offline and into real community. About 6 months ago, based on what we know of the timeline, Louis Mangione had back surgery. And then friends of his on Twitter and elsewhere started pinging him on social media and saying, Louis, haven't heard from you. Are you okay? Luigi, are you there? Reply to me, please. We're concerned about you. Luigi, he never replied. What we know now in his timeline is that he was beginning to descend into despair and some sort of madness. Dude needed to touch some grass. He needed community, and he isolated himself. And it's not a coincidence, I think, that the angriest people we're encountering in politics now are the people who are most online. And when they have community offline, they're having community of people who are just as online as they are. And so they're not actually breaking bread with people who are disengaged from the online chatter and out of the real world. They're interacting with the people who are most plugged into the echo chamber online, and they fuel each other's frenzy and madness. We can't create the way God creates. We can only mock what he creates. God created men and women and put us into a community with each other. We created social media and isolated each other into something that looks and purports to be a community, but is actually deeply isolating and prevents us from actually having meaningful interaction with other human beings who are different than us. All of us could use to be online less. And I have a sneaking suspicion that we're going to learn Luigi Mangione went down rabbit holes online and became more and more radicalized online and gave up the community of people fearfully made in the image of God around him in favor of the community made fearfully in his image online, and it broke him. And we're seeing more and more people like that. And that's one of the other reasons these are such dangerous times. When you're yelling lived experience and you don't mean it ironically, you are someone who is hyper online and deeply broken. Hillsdale College has built a community around the country of people in person, live human beings, where you don't get indoctrinated, you get educated. They've been doing this since 1844 in Michigan. They'd love to have you involved. Go online to figure out how to connect with Hillsdale offline at ericforhillsdale.com today. Go to Eric for Hillsdale. In fact, it's been a while since I've done this, so I'm going to go ericforhillsdale.com. If you go today for ericforhillsdale.com, you will be able to take a lecture series on Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, part of the literature department at Hillsdale College, taught by Dwight Lindley, the associate professor of English literature. And it gives you a sense of how Hillsdale conducts education. These are great video trailers. Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. In fact, if you go to ericforhillsdale.com right now, you'll see it at 6 lessons, 3.5 hours long. You take it at your own pace. And y'all, I got to tell you, Hillsdale, all of these that they do are great. And also, you'll be able to see their catalog, the DVDs, the books that you can order for friends and family, and sign up for Imprimus completely free. Go check out Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, a lecture series taught by Dwight Lindley, associate professor of English literature at Hillsdale College. It is completely free of charge. Go sign up now, ericforhillsdale.com, E-R-I-C-K, ericforhillsdale.com. Y'all, I just had a near, problem. So I got to be on TV in 20 minutes. And I keep a wardrobe in my office and had to change my shirt to put on a dress shirt for TV. And I'm unzipping my pants to tuck in my shirt. And I thought, oh, my gosh, am I like undressing in front of like all the people with the freaking live stream camera now that we have in the office. Thank goodness the video had rolled over to a we're in commercial break graphic instead of the video of me. Y'all didn't need to see that. Y'all did not need to see that. Okay, I gotta. Mitch McConnell's spokesman has released a statement here in the last minute. He fell at a luncheon for Republicans. His spokesman says Leader McConnell tripped following lunch, sustained a minor cut to the face, and sprained his wrist. He has been cleared to resume his schedule. He will be fine. Good. That's good to know. And meanwhile, I'm glad I'm not alone in the reaction here of seeing Luigi Mangione yelling about lived experience, that is a really big red flag, that this guy is just a hyper online loon. Meanwhile, University of Pennsylvania professor Julia Alexieva is online on TikTok celebrating Luigi Mangione's alleged assassination of United Healthcare's because University of Pennsylvania. Y'all, like I said in the first hour, these universities in the Ivy League have become Islamic madrasas for the wokes. They're radicalizing Americans, indoctrinating Americans into violence. They want to blow up oil pipelines and natural gas pipelines. They're assassinating the CEOs of healthcare companies and justifying it. It's going to be very, very soon before they begin assassinating oil company executives. In fact, the Times of Ireland today has a piece, an opinion piece about how we need to be more vigilant about destroying the profits of these companies. The actual headline from this piece is, when are we going to have the courage to stop the climate crisis? And this is the subtitle: Capitalism is driving the destruction of our planet. We have to think outside and against the framework of our current political system. We are rapidly moving towards environmentalists turning violent globally, led by scowling Greta Thunberg. These are dangerous times, and the people on the left just keep wanting to ratchet it up. No one wants to de-escalate on the left. They want to add a but every time they try to. They got to add a but to rationalize and explain away their own craziness. That's not a good thing. All right, I will be on TV at 3:15 on News Nation. I will see you guys tomorrow. You guys have a great rest of the day, and be in touch with me if you got Christmas music recommendations for the Christmas show.